Hello, and welcome to the Aurora Podcast, where we discuss topics that are used to advance our understanding about today's world, as well as discuss topics that exist outside of traditional school curriculum. Our goal is to also help students discover what life might be like outside of high school and college. My name is Ben Lan. I'm your host, and I'm joined with Owen Voigt.
I would like to recognize that we gather at the Whatcom Museum, where they seek to stimulate curiosity about our changing cultural and historical landscapes, from the youngest to the oldest minds.
And this is the podcast for students by students. And today we will be interviewing John Romano, who is a software engineer. So would you mind maybe just introducing yourself a little bit more for our audience?
Yeah, sure, would love to. Well, thank you both of you, Ben and Owen, for having me, and a pleasure to be on here. As I mentioned, I'm John. I am currently a software engineer working at Twilio, which is an SF-based tech company. I graduated from Stanford in 2019, so I've been working as a software engineer ever since then. Can talk more about how I got into it, what led me to software engineering, but I've always enjoyed engineering, just to put it shortly. And in college and through various places, found out that software engineering was right for me. So I've really enjoyed it and look forward to talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of our first question, like you said, how did you kind of get into software engineering? What stuck out to you about software engineering as a career?
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit about my journey. I always knew that I was very math and science oriented. Knew this from kind of like middle school when I started to get pretty good at it. I enjoyed it, got A's and all that good stuff. And then in high school, I went into this kind of math and science program, if you will. I went to a different high school than I was supposed to, so super nerdy of me. But I really enjoyed that. Found people who enjoyed it as much as I do, had a good time. Um, but what I was focused in was mainly kind of more the math and science and not as much as the technology. Most of the people I knew would go in like mechanical, civil, electrical. Software engineering, as I know it now, wasn't really something on the horizon. Maybe it was just because I wasn't living in the Bay Area or somewhere where it was super popular. I'm from the South originally, so um, kind of the more traditional types of engineering or what you see over there. And so up until college, I thought I was going to major in something like civil, mechanical, electrical. And it wasn't until I got to college over in the Bay Area where I was exposed to more of computer science, programming. All of this was new to me, so I hadn't been exposed to it before. But something about it really drew me, just the fact that you could literally open your laptop and you have so many tools available at your disposal. You can build what you want. You don't have to go procure materials, spend hours in the lab. It's right there for you to do. You can like kind of capture that essence of what engineering is all about just by using tools that are available on the internet and tools that a lot of people use. So those were some of the things that really stood out to me and really excited me about it.
Um, what are some of those tools that you, I guess, use on a daily basis?
Oh, I mean, it could be literally anything like a social media app, anything on your phone, um, software used to check into your flights. I mean, anything that involves technology, your phones, computers, if it involves the internet, especially, there's a lot going on behind the scenes and there's a lot that goes into it. So, thinking deeply about that, there's so much engineering there. And I think kind of getting to that engineering, the essence of it that goes into all of that is something that was super interesting to me. And I learned progressively more and more as I went through college. But yeah, it's really wide ranging.
Yeah. So where did you start out? I guess coming out of high school, going into college. Where did you start out, and what did you begin to do as a major? Was that software engineering, or did you start somewhere else and then get to software engineering?
Yeah, no, good question. I originally started trying to be as broad. So my approach to getting into or like choosing a major at college, and one thing to know is that Stanford is pretty lenient with when you can choose your major. The deadline, I think, I don't know if it's still accurate, but when I was there, the deadline was the end of sophomore year. You should have a major declared. And I even knew people who would take until sometime in their junior year to kind of switch around and figure it out. So we had a lot of time, but knowing that I still wanted to narrow it down with enough time for me to spare. And I knew, like I said, that I wanted to major in something engineering related, just because engineering as a whole always appealed to me, but I didn't know exactly what type. And I knew also that the CS classes at Stanford were super popular. So right day one, from like the orientations and all this stuff, you heard like, oh man, just all these things about CS. You knew everyone would talk to your friends, they're all going to show up to like the intro lecture. So I'm like, okay, I'll see what this is all about. Show up to CS 106A, ended up taking that class. Didn't do super great in it. It was just something so new for me. So it took me a while took until like the next class until I really started to like figure out what I was doing. Um, but I think what got it there for me was just being exposed to it, just being in an environment where it was normal. People did it a lot, and you had people who had been doing it for years. I was someone who had never even been exposed to it, but eventually, the more I learned about it, the more classes I took, started to find out that it was something I wanted to do.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Just talking a little bit more about software engineering. Did you have to learn how to code, or is that something that you learned in high school, or when did that kind of
Yeah,
factor in?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I'd done a little bit of coding in high school, but it was very specific, like maybe a couple lines of MATLAB here for a project. Nothing where you get a formal, like, okay, here's how I would program something. Here's all the here's how a language works. Here's the main things that go into that. It's just kind of very surface level. Pick this, look at this documentation, you'll figure it out from there. So no, I didn't learn in high school really. Like I said, I was really only exposed to it in college. So learning the fundamentals of what programming is, and then just learning that a language is just a means to, tell the computer what you want to do. But just getting a deeper picture in what actually happens when a program is run, all those types of things. That's something I learned in college, and yeah, it's definitely a good time to learn it.
Yeah. Um, so what was your major with getting out of college? You majored in software.
In
What
computer science,
specifically?
yeah,
It was computer science.
yeah,
Okay.
computer science. We didn't have software engineering, and as far as I've seen, that's not as popular a major, and they're definitely different things. But a lot
Mhm.
of computer science majors do go into software engineering.
So okay. So computer science. So coming out of college, then, what was your goals or plans, or did you really have anything? Um, and how did you get into the job you have now?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, as far as goals and plans, it is pretty, like I said, pretty common and standard for a lot of CS majors, especially at Stanford in the Bay Area, to want to just find a comfortable software engineering job, kind of build up their skills through that, apply some of those CS skills to that. And that's what worked best for me. I really valued that stability and applying what I'd learned in an enterprise setting. So that's how I thought about that. I knew I'd wanted to do that, but that's not to say there's the only thing. That's the only thing you can do with it, and you don't have to like learn or get a software engineering specific major in order to do that. There's a lot more to computers and the science of computers, hence computer science. Um, a lot of that's more theoretical, and then software engineering is like more of the engineering kind of practical type applications of it. But it's a wide range. But I knew early on that I wanted that stability. I wanted to make contributions and feel rewarded when those affected people, and that they could use them in their everyday lives. That was something that was rewarding to me.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were really into math and science in high school. What were maybe some other majors you might have looked at that involved math and science?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it was all the other engineering fields. I know I did an internship actually after my freshman year in civil engineering. Those use computers a lot too. Nowadays, a lot of those engineering majors use CAD, computer aided design. Um, so I'm sure there's more and more, not necessarily programming, but just technical knowledge you need. So the math and science, I always, whenever I would like solve a calculus problem or whatever, I was like, man, I wonder what this would look like if I was doing it to build a bridge or like an electrical grid. I don't know. So I wanted to explore that and kind of get the same feeling. But I think the internship really helped me see that, okay, maybe it's not as like that. At least in the internship I did, that process moves a little bit slower than I would have liked. So to get back to your remind me of the original question. I feel like I'm straying away a little bit, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, just like how as you were interested in math and science, maybe some other
Right. The other
fields
majors,
and
yeah, that's correct.
majors you looked
Yeah.
at. Yeah.
Yeah. Other than other engineering, like engineering majors specifically, sure there was like, okay, maybe earth science, um, mathematics, even pure mathematics, kind of applied mathematics. I was also, me personally, was really into philosophy and economics, although I wish I had taken more economics um, in college. But yeah, there's a lot of things you could do with a love for math and science, but it was just, I think, the more I discovered that what I wanted was applying those to engineering problems, that's when my decisions became a little easier. But yeah, you can go anywhere with love for those.
Yeah. Um, what do you do as a job? What is your are you have specific projects you're working on right now? If you can talk about that, what yeah, what do you do?
Yeah, no, I can't talk about it. Twilio is a public company, and the product my team works on is also public. So Twilio as a company, and that's Twilio. Sometimes I tell people where I work, and they're like, "Can you repeat that?" So
Yeah.
that, or they've just never heard of it. Twilio as a company is essentially a customer. They describe themselves as a customer engagement platform, and what that looks like is, at the most simple level, they provide what are called APIs for developers to in other companies to send SMS, MMS, WhatsApp, any kind of messages to their own customers. So, like, say if it's you're at an Airbnb or you're like want to communicate with your host through Airbnb, you use messages to do that. So that's something that Twilio could power. Or another example is like around election season. A lot of these campaigns want to, you know, annoyingly sometimes send mass text to uh, potential voters. So they'll like kind of schedule some messages that they want to send in bulk at a certain time, and then they can do that through tools powered by Twilio. So that's kind of more what my specific team does, is not only like sending messages at a certain time or like right now, but at a certain time in the future, and being able to service all those requests, store the messages, send them out when they need to be sent. Those all involve various engineering challenges. There's cost constraints for the company. Essentially, engineering, all types of engineering, but especially in software, you just have to manage the constraints you have, and there's also you have to pick a lot of the right tools for the job, and then work with existing systems as an individual engineer. Have to like learn the way things are done um, in the team, and then continue to contribute to those. But yeah, so at a high level, my team does that message scheduling is what it would be called, and yeah, it's a really good for me. It's been a really good way to learn about those systems overall and just how to contribute to them as a software engineer.
Yeah. Um, do you in your job day to day, how often are you like um working with just pure coding, or are you often like I'm assuming probably not, but just with just that, but do you what other kind of tools do you use? Do you just websites? What kind of organizers do you use? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good question because sometimes I think people could think that if you're a software engineer, you're just coding all day. And I'm sure there's maybe jobs where that's more the case, but for most tech companies, I would say a software engineer typically, if you're just like an individual contributor and not like a manager or anything, your day would sure it would consist of coding, would consist of like working on your own features that you were tasked with building, but on top of that, you have so much else, not to mention like meetings. There's like daily stand up, which is just the daily like morning check in that teams do to say, hey, here's what I did yesterday. Here's what I plan to do today. You have code reviews. So if one of your teammates submits some code to be what's called merged into the code base as a whole, you have to review that as a teammate and say, hey, I think this should be changed, or hey, this looks good. And that takes time as well. You can be pairing with someone to say, okay, I'm going to help this person code or help them think through a problem. All types of things, meetings, code reviews, a lot of things that are other than coding that can take up your time. You could be also like designing something. So say if you're a little more senior and there's a new feature you want to design, it's going to take or create, and it's going to like take maybe a redesign of some existing systems, um, you would have to spend some time thinking about that, thinking about what services do I want to use, what trade-offs do I need to think about for the different tools I have available. Um, so yeah, something like that. Like I have a senior engineer on my team who was spent a lot of time doing just that, and he didn't touch a line of code because his time was spent creating some documents that had a lot of different diagrams and all these arrows. And it's like, okay, here's how the data will flow. So you have to do a lot of planning. You don't want to just jump into building something and then later realize, okay, maybe we could have done this better. So there's a lot of intentionality and a lot that goes into it other than just pure coding.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's good to know for anyone who would want to consider that field.
Yeah. So as you kind of mentioned of people considering this field, for maybe students watching this who are interested in computer science and coding, how would you encourage them to maybe consider a job something like you're doing, or what would be kind of your advice for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, imagine your audience would be primarily like high schoolers, maybe even earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great time to start getting introduced to computer science, software engineering. The Obviously the first thing you can do is like take your AP computer science class, but of course, you'll get a lot of variability depending on the teacher. I wouldn't say that's like the only thing you should do. I myself didn't actually ever take that class, and I remember at my high school it wasn't the best from the people who I know who took it. It wasn't advertised that much either. So hopefully things have improved to where software and computer science is a little more popular. But what's great now is that there are so many resources on the internet, so many things you can learn. So it's good and bad. Because you can have all this information at your fingertips, and then a little bad because it could be overwhelming and you don't quite know where to start. So what I would start with is just thinking high level about, okay, what would I want to create? Could be a mobile app, could be a website, could be something simple. Start simple and try to figure out, okay, what will I need in order to make this? Do your research, look into, and it could just be looking up like, okay, how do I do this? Let me follow a tutorial, or it could just be, let me talk to someone who knows something. Maybe if you know a software engineer, if you know someone who majored in CS, they can kind of help you answer some of those questions about how do I even get started on this? Because yeah, sometimes it's not exactly clear, and a lot of knowledge when you read these articles is assumed. But if you're starting from nothing, it'd be nice to have someone to kind of guide you through it. Be like, oh, hey, actually, you need to know this before you look into something like this. Um, so yeah, but just for example, say if you want to build like a mobile app, look into Android has amazing documentation, um, and so you can just look into that, download the environment, the Android IDE, Android Studio, get that on a computer, and then you're pretty much good to go as far as coding an Android app. They have an emulator you can use like on your computer, so you don't even have to buy an Android phone. So that's just like one example, and then you learn Java, Kotlin. You can learn these languages, and I would say don't feel like you have to learn all of the data science, or not data science, data structures and algorithms and all this like very theoretical knowledge that you'll get to in college. There's a lot you can do with just being scrappy, as is a term that you hear a lot in the tech world. But yeah, but like just being resourceful and not letting the wealth of information intimidate you, but just kind of finding one thing, focusing on that, building one thing, and just like having these little milestones kind of give you a boost in confidence, and then before you know it, you'll be building something impressive.
Yeah. Um, what is your process when you're building something, when you're, I guess, day-to-day job? What's your process in problem solving and working through certain things? Because often on the computer, there's not a lot of like visual, physical, like, oh, I can see the problem. Here's the mechanical design to fix it. It's learning a language. It's finding right problems in there. So, what is your process to solve problems that come up?
Absolutely, and I think that gets to the most valuable thing I learned when I finished my CS major. It wasn't even necessarily the notes I took, the knowledge I learned. A lot of those things, the details of the specific classes you take, you kind of forget. But the one thing that you really are forced to do when you complete these assignments is you build such an intuition for debugging, for solving the problems you get. And I've always said the hardest thing about computer science building software as your major is it's not like you have a problem set and you know, okay, there's this many questions. It'll probably take me X amount of time to finish. When you're building software, you could run into a bug that you have no idea where it's coming from and you have no idea how long it'll take you. And I've been there so many times. And it's so frustrating, it's daunting, where you'll get these error messages and you won't know why it's happening, if it's just like you missed a character somewhere, or maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with your design. It could be either of those. So the most important thing that I like to do when I solve problems, whether it be I don't really know the context of this task or like what all is involved with it, or I'm working with a code base like I am since I'm kind of new to the company, my company, where it's like I don't know exactly what everything does, but you just have to, number one, be patient with yourself and not get intimidated, because it's usually not as scary as you think. And then number two, what's important is to, continually, as you make your changes, make a change, run it, make a change, run it. And by run it, I mean like run the program and make sure it works like you expect. Because the opposite, or like the alternative would be, I'm just going to make all these changes, do what I think works, and then I'll run it. Because then you'll be sorting through layers and layers of bugs that you wouldn't have had if you had just like been incremental about it. So just really taking small bites and breaking down problems into the smallest chunks you can, I think is the most helpful thing I've seen, not only in college and then also, in my career, is just break things down as small as you can, get very specific with your questions, be able to articulate what exactly it is you don't understand if you don't understand something, what you've tried, so that you can tell the people that you're seeking help from, like, hey, here's what I've tried, here's what I don't understand, rather than I'm stuck, help, and just throw up your hands, because that's not very helpful. So it's just a lot of these practical problem solving skills that you can apply to anything else that very much apply to computer science and software engineering that I found have saved me more than once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A question I have is working for the kind of company that you do, what might be some advantages and maybe then some also disadvantages?
Yeah, sure. The kind of company I do in terms of what would you say?
Like, is it, do you get to work online or do you have to go to an office?
Yeah,
Just kind of, are you on your computer all day, or how does that kind of working in this field
It's like
kind of
the
look
day to
like?
day life.
Yeah.
yeah, day to day life. Yeah, sure. Some a major trend in the tech industry has been to move to remote work, either hybrid or fully remote.
Hmm.
I work for a company that is fully remote. So, as I mentioned briefly, they are based in the West Coast. I live in New York currently. So that means I work West Coast hours, which is nice to like not have to wake up super early, but also it's like, okay, sometimes I may stay later or, the hours can just shift a bit. So I do like working remote, and I think it, for the flexibility it provides, I think it also would be nice to go into an office, have that camaraderie there. There isn't even an office for my company in New York. So it can be a bit weird at times, but it's just kind of one of the things you learn to deal with. Um, and yeah, other than that, it's usually don't it's pretty standard, like 9 to 5, 9 to 6. There will be times where you are what's called on call. So engineers will rotate, being okay, if something breaks like in the middle of the night, someone has to be the first one responsible. So it's like just having different watches. And so that's something where you may have to like stay up late, or just like be pinged at 3 a.m. But that's a responsibility that's shared between engineers on a team. So it's not one person's doing everything. But other than that, that's kind of pretty much the day to day. You log in, go to your meetings, write a little code, and then sign off.
Yeah. Um, Going back to like just out of college, do you have any advice if you're somebody's say looking for a job, internships, how to do those, how to look for a job in this field, because it's a very broad, right? It's a very broad field. How do you have any advice for somebody looking to do this just out of college?
Yeah, I would say, well, the first thing I would say is that when talking about this field, it's not just software engineering. Look at, if you want to work at a tech company, and there's even more than that. Within a tech company, there's software engineers, but there's also product managers, people who are making product level decisions, working with software engineers on a team. But I know a lot of people who either started off doing that or switched to that after doing software engineering just because they wanted to kind of adopt more of a customer centric framework and say, okay, what will it take to make a great product rather than what will it take to build a product per se. So yeah, just thinking about what interests you at what level of the process, at what stage of the process you really want to dive in on. Um, and then as far as like getting a job in that, I would say something that really helped for me was to like the first thing I ever had on my resume when I didn't even have a software internship was going to a hackathon. Stanford has tree hacks. So that was
Uh-huh.
kind of the first thing I was able to put on my resume to say, hey, I did this. My team ended up winning that specific uh, little, not the whole competition, but just like there was a certain category. And that was like a cool thing
Mhm.
to put on my resume. So just to show that you have an interest, that you're doing things, having a GitHub, which is like kind of like your portfolio, that can help. And then also, yeah, just doing well in your classes, really talking to people who are in the field and just being active about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a question I always like to ask the different graduates we have interviewed is how did you go about um, really honing in on one specific major, and why did you kind of make that transition over maybe something else you were interested in?
Yeah, so for me, it came down to kind of after beginning of sophomore year, I should say. It was about time for me to start to hone in on, okay, what type of engineering do I really want to do? That summer, I was coming off of having done a civil engineering internship, and as I had mentioned before, it was fun in the sense it was like good people. I learned a lot, but part of sometimes you do an internship and you learn that's something you don't want to do. For me, it the process of developing land, for example, which was what the firm I worked at happened to do. So developing land in like the DC area, and by that I mean just like getting it from buying a plot of land to putting buildings and parking lots and storm drains and all of that. The process just seemed to be very kind of. It was pretty much you were doing the same thing, maybe at a different place. It just didn't appeal to me all that much. It seemed kind of very static as a field, and I'm sure there's great research being done in the civil engineering field, like in academia wise, but just industry wise, you work with a lot of government entities, you work with a lot of contractors, different structural engineers, all these different people. It's just kind of a slow process. So that was one thing for me where I'm like, okay, now that I have a bit of industry knowledge, and that's something I would recommend is to get industry knowledge like firsthand as early as you can and know if it's something you really want to do. So internships are a good way to do that. But you could also like talk to people in the field, whatnot. For me, that was the turning point where I said, okay, I've taken a couple CS classes like freshman year already, so let me lean into those now because I know that rather than there's like kind of traditional engineering, like in a kind of in the corporate world, there's like okay, just civil, electrical, mechanical, and those all are kind of you tend to be you work for a firm, maybe they do some consulting for various clients, um, and that's its own thing. But for me, I wanted something where okay, let me work with something that is a lot more day to day customer facing and tech. Many tech companies seem to fit that bill where it's like you could work for a social media company, you could work for like an airline app or something. You could do a lot of things that when someone asks you what you do, you'd be like, okay, you've used this before, and this is here's how what I've built contributes to what you use every day. And it just seemed a lot more exciting to me from the aspect of okay, there's always there's new technology coming on. AI was something that I was interested in that had always like been the nice fancy buzzword. But a lot of that had to do with computer science, and there's so many exciting topics that you could just dive in on. Um, so when that kind of dawned on me, and when I figured out, okay, here's what I don't want to do, but now at the same time, the door is kind of opening to say, okay, there's this really exciting dynamic field where, oh, by the way, you don't really have to like spend that much time in a lab, or you just have your laptop and you can have all that at your reach. I think it was just a winning combination.
Yeah, perfect. So we're kind of hitting around the mark we want. Are there any other questions you want us to ask you, or anything else you want to talk about before we kind of wrap up the episode?
No, nothing too major. I would just say, it's, I guess, the process of going through it. Yeah, it's not by any means like an easy major. I wouldn't say it's the hardest one, but, it can
Hmm.
be tough at times. Deadlines creep up on you. There's a lot of workload, and it's scary knowing that, sometimes your bugs won't always make sense and you won't know how long it'll take to find them. And yeah, I think it was a growing pain at times, learning how to think in a programming way, think like a programmer, how to debug, build up that intuition. But just keep at it, keep going, and as long as you are someone that, if as long as it's someone that you enjoy, something that you enjoy, don't think that just because it's not making sense to you, or that other people it's coming easier to them. Like, don't worry about any of that. It will come to you as long as you're doing it for the right reasons. It'll come eventually. So I would just say to anyone who's kind of hitting some roadblocks, just take a breather, take heart. It'll come to you eventually.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think one thing in particular that I found a big takeaway from this is, like you said, just don't think too hard. It'll kind of come to you. What you want to
Yeah.
do, um, it'll kind of opportunities will present themselves. And this your story of interning as a civil engineer, and realizing like this is far too industry based. There's too many processes, too many steps in the process, and just doing it and realizing, oh, this is not right, and then moving on to software engineering and realizing, oh, this is perfect and this is what I want to do. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And yeah.
Yeah, and then for me as well, like kind of how Owen said, is looking at trying to be very broad before you narrow down to a specific aspect of computer science, and maybe doing those internships as a civil engineer and looking at different engineering before you really want to hone in on something to make sure that's really what you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, like thanks again for joining us. Um,
Thank you
yeah,
for having me. It was a
see you
pleasure.
all. Yeah, of course. See you all next time.